Well, yeah, I mean, and this is actually a really important point because one of the confusing things for me when I'm here, like, I'm always more focused on how are these ideas being practically implemented in the real world. And, one of the things that we kept hearing over and over again is, well, we need, like, if we implement these laws, we're not going to be teaching people history. I learned about slavery in school. I learned about some of the darker parts of United States history. I learned about different elements of world history in school. I went to school a long time ago. Like I don't understand this argument that history isn't being taught unless we teach it in this very specific way.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I kind of reflected on similar things. I said, where are we not learning this? Where has slavery not been taught? And aside from some anecdotal examples people gave, well, when I was little, and you can't verify those, I don't think it's true. I think they're being very dishonest and they're being disingenuous about their intentions. When you read the material and the literature and you listen to them, it's very clear what they want to do. It's very clear what their goals are, but they don't want to be straightforward about that. They don't want to be honest, and that's why they're doing so much to keep transparency out of schools. They're very afraid of the public finding out, some of the reading materials and some of what they do in classrooms. Because I've seen it, and what a lot of people don't want to hear is that, unfortunately, a lot of this is coming really organically, grassroots up from teachers. It's not just, top down. I mean, it's been formalized and institutionalized now, but this has been going on for a while. And I hear people, they say that to me. They say, well, I get most teachers aren't on board with this. And I said, well, unfortunately they are. A lot of them, majority of them are.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Well, no, let's really dig into that because I think it's worth kind of exploring some of this a little bit more. So, what are some of the things that you've seen in your work as a teacher that you think people need to know about?
So it's usually subtle. It's usually the way teachers are framing content. I kind of go after English teachers a lot. I see into the intrusion of literacy um, and literature, these kind of racial agendas being kind of implemented in terms of the readings they're doing. I've seen some really, I mean, blatant bad examples. There was one teacher who's no longer with the district. He left, but I mean, he was just fully using his English course as a kind of agenda-driven platform. And I had students, reading about whiteness and coming to me and asking me about systemic racism and white privilege and oppression. And he wasn't even teaching it well. I mean, I'll never forget when a kid shows me their project and says, "What do you think?" And they're showing pictures of dogs attacking black people from the civil rights movement, saying, "Can you believe what's happening today?" I said, "Today? What do you mean today?" And they said, "Well, like the stuff that's going on." I said, "You know when that's from?" And I don't know if he saw it. I don't know if he corrected them, but it just was reflective of what they're being exposed to. And I had noticed over time too, more and more students were coming to me in class and they were using the language of the woke. They were talking about systemic racism and white privilege without really understanding what it was. Um, and I knew something was going on. Where are they getting this from? They're not getting it at home. They're not getting it, really. Most of the kids are not reading the, type of stuff we're reading online. They're getting it from their classrooms and teachers. And I think after the 2016 election, too, a lot of teachers made it their imperative to politicize their classrooms and
Mhm.
to have a mission that we need to prevent Trumpism by really making our classes political.
Well, and that was actually going to be my very next question because you've been teaching for quite a while now. What was the time frame of when you started seeing this stuff creep in?
I'd say really heavily in 2016, right around the time of the election.
Mhm.
There was even a teacher who put up kind of posters after the election around the school, like "We the People," and I mean, it was kind of subtle, but you got their message. And I saw more and more teachers deciding to talk about the election and Donald Trump and the significance and race in America right around that time period. And I also think it coincides with a lot of, what's been going on at the college and university level is trickling downwards. I've called it trickle down radicalization, where you have it going from the university level into teacher education programs. And then these new teachers are going in and they're bringing that ideology right into the classroom. And in many cases, they're encouraged to do so. They're told teaching is a political act.
Mm.
This is your job, is liberation and so forth.
One of the things that one of the analogies I use to try to help people understand how big this problem is in higher education, like let me know if you think I'm correct.
Okay.
So almost every single teacher teaching in public schools today went through a teacher education program, a school of education in which the people teaching them how to be teachers were all indoctrinated into critical race theory themselves. And so in order to fix the problem in higher education, it not only involves training an entire new generation of teachers, it involves training an entire new generation of teacher trainers to thoroughly rid us of this problem. Am I wrong when I say that?
No, you're not wrong. I mean, that's absolutely correct. I think this stuff starts at the university level, and you have to look at where our teachers are coming from. Where are they getting this? I mean, many times these are, you look at an English teacher and you say, wait a second, you're not really, knee deep in sociology or in history or in any of these disciplines. And why are you coming into education? Not with, I want to teach kids to read better and fix the literacy gap and so forth, but coming in with these ideological mandates. And I think the education departments have become increasingly bad at this, where they kind of have a mission now. This is their go into the masses, pedagogy of liberation. Paulo Freire, who is the progenitor of critical pedagogy, is kind of a staple now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a much bigger problem than people realize, because how do you solve that? It's to use their word, it's systemic, and it's not as easy. I wish you could pass a bill or pass a law or just FOIA enough schools and you'd have an answer, but this is a much bigger issue.
No, I completely agree. Like how I got into this topic was I started because I'm an organizational psychologist. So I started seeing it in my clients. I would start seeing like people reporting like microaggressions to
Mm.
HR and all this stuff. And people, we used to say that once these kids got out into the real world, they would be set straight because they'd have to, have a job and be able to function. Well, now all these organizations were starting to feed into it. And that was the first problem that I saw because just of my perspective. But when I started looking at the bigger picture, it was like, no, that's not the problem. The public that might reinforce it, and that's not a good situation because now there's no like even in the real world, they're not getting that pushback that they need in order to, become more attached to reality. But like it's the public schools. It is all starting with the public schools. And it's like it's such a monster that without I think dramatic changes very fast, it is not like we are going into a really, really negative direction. You mentioned critical pedagogy. What is that?
Critical pedagogy, it's hard to kind of define in a sentence, but I guess you could look at it as it's the idea that education should be political, and um, education needs to be framed in the language of the oppressed and the oppressors. So Paulo Freire kind of postulated that schools are actually kind of tools of the oppressive systems of society. And so what you needed to have happen was you needed to have um, teachers change that by applying a critical lens to pedagogy, to curriculum, to schools, and that you had to, in essence, kind of radicalize students. The ultimate goal being that, to have social transformation through schools. And he was very inspired by, the Cuban model of schooling and Mao's Cultural Revolution. He didn't see those as bad things. He saw those as examples of how schools can be used as a political weapon. And his book has been very influential in shaping educational thought at the university level and teacher education programs. And a lot of ideas we see coming in, into our schools really stem from critical pedagogy.
Did you go through a traditional teacher education program or did you become a teacher in a different way?
I did. I went through a traditional program. Um, it's funny because, I think back then I bought into it a lot more before I kind of got a hold of myself and said, wait, what is going on? So I have a hard time remembering how explicit it was. I certainly do remember it was there were these topics that came up. I don't think my program, it was as heavy then as it was now. It really depends on the school and the program you go through. I'm definitely seeing it now become much more explicit and much more a part of really their overall philosophy and mission.
Can you tell us about some of the things you've seen that make it much more explicit now?
Yeah, I think in like education programs, they will the resources they use. So a lot of times they'll use Paulo Freire critical pedagogy, culturally relevant teaching or culturally relevant pedagogy. It's pretty much, mandated reading now in these programs. I do remember having to read and go through that. And that's very much influenced by these same ideas. So it's become much more explicit in terms of the material students are required to read and how it's being framed, what their function as a teacher is. I think a lot of teachers are told they are meant to do this. This is a calling. This is a mission, and it kind of has these religious overtones. Go in, kind of preach to the masses, and they'll use the word pedagogy of liberation, liberate students so they can go ahead and liberate society and dismantle these oppressive systems outwards from their schools. And now I'm seeing what I think you've really seen, now with all these DEI departments popping up in school districts, is it's now become formalized. Now it's been bought into by the district, and they've actually created departments that are explicitly ideological in nature and are meant to train staff, teachers in these ways and have it applied to their teaching practices and curriculums.